like to call this meeting to order. If you please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, members present this evening are myself, Mayor Morrow, Council members Gearboss, CO, McClellan, Mitchell, Dillon, and Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. From City staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, Treasurer Bennett, City Superintendent Rubel, DPW Director Fordyce, and Police Chief Hart. The rest of you in the audience this evening, we welcome you and we encourage you to sign in the back to my left. There are also agendas on the back table for your convenience. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted, noting that the language of the LGBTQ Pride Month resolution has changed from what was distributed in your packet on Thursday evening. Is there a motion?
So moved.
As submitted, Mr. Seal?
Yes, sir.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by McClellan. I'm sorry.
We wanted to add something to the discussion. Are we going to add the strategic plan? Because it wasn't listed.
Why don't we bring that up under reports or other announcements?
Okay, that's fine.
Yep, we'll make note of that, though.
No problem.
It's been properly moved by CO, seconded by McClellan to approve the agenda as submitted. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Motion carries unanimously. There are no absences, so we'll proceed with citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments?
Mary Hess, since the budget is on tonight, I would request on how I go, whether I do a RSV, I would like to know how many $1 million the city is currently indebted to by these taxpayers. And also, as far as the budget, in 1960s, your general fund would support the whole city. And then we came up with the EDC district, and that money was captured, and that was used for certain things. Now we have a LIFA, a TIFA, and EDC, and all of those sections have their own money. Now that money comes out of the general fund. So, of course, the taxpayers are the ones that have to subsidize those three things. And I noticed when you were talking earlier, as far as proposal, I do think if you're talking about more millage for November election, we ought to know what our indebtedness is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hess. Are there additional citizen comments?
Matt Rockwell. I was listening to the money agenda of what we are putting out for. I think that we need to not have another millage on the book because of the elderly people that are getting up there and up there and up there. So it's getting to the point where you guys are wanting to spend. So.
Thank you, Mr. Rockwell. Additional citizen comments on agenda items? No, then we'll proceed to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for discussion.
Move to approve as submitted.
Been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar to approve as submitted. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Mitchell. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move now to public hearing. Agenda item 18-107. This is General Appropriation Act for fiscal year 2018-2019 budget. The first motion will be a motion to open the public hearing at 7:35.
So moved.
So moved.
Moved by CO, seconded by Dillon to open the public hearing. We'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Public hearing is now open, and we will afford anyone who wishes to speak regarding our upcoming budget the opportunity to address City Council at this time.
Move to close.
Been moved by Dillon to close at 7:31. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Seal. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Public hearing is now closed. The third motion will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the May 25th, 2018 memo from Deputy Treasurer McDonough regarding the General Appropriation Act for fiscal year 19, and to approve and adopt or not to adopt the resolution as submitted, adopting the General Operating Act budget for fiscal year 2018-2019, providing for a general operating millage of 14.1215 mils, including the funding required for fire protection, the 2001 debt street millage of 0.1198 mils, the 2004 street debt millage of 0.3987 mils, and the refuge millage levy of 1.64 mils, for a total millage levy of 16.28 mils, which is unchanged from fiscal year 2017-2018.
Move to acknowledge, approve, and adopt.
Thank you, Mr. Seo. It's been properly moved by Councilman Seo to acknowledge, to approve, and to adopt. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Ms. Bennett, I would allow you the opportunity to comment at this time if you'd like. If not, no big deal. Okay, thank you. Comments, actually, first questions from the dais. Okay, how about discussion on the motion? Mr. Gearbaugh.
I appreciate all the work staff has done on this to bring forward a decent budget that's balanced. I think a couple of my concerns I've already identified, and I'm not going to push further on, except for the farmer's market. I do expect a resolution for that next year. I'm disappointed that that couldn't have been resolved sooner, so no statement on that, further than what I just said. And then the other aspect, I do want to continue discussing, and I think it's a little bit more looking at the policy and overall how we approach the budget. There are some reoccurring savings that we had that I thought should have been built into the system that we have presently and identified more specifically than to, approach it how we did. Yes, it does mean postponing some of the expenditures, but those expenditures can always be re-budgeted or reallocated into the future year when you move into the new budget and you take it out of fund balance. My concern is that when we identify these savings for things such as OPEB or for pension budgets, I think those need to be identified specifically in the budget to show that we're actually working towards that. I brought that up during our work meeting. It just didn't occur at this point in time. And I think those are the ways in the future we need to look a little more harder as we attempt to try and justify any kind of millage increase or any kind of operating gains or salary increases and all of that. Everything must be accounted for in an easily identifiable way.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. I saw Mr. Seo's hand up first, and then I'll jump to Mayor Pro Tem Tahar.
I guess I just want to add my thanks as well to the city staff overall. I know what it means to propose a budget of this size and complexity that yet is a balanced budget. It starts at the departmental level where individual departments submit their budget to the city manager. It's then gone over individually, department by department, with the city manager and his financial staff. And they're made to show proofs of why it is what they are requesting is necessary and needed, and how it fits into the overall city plan. Then they come to council through a series of meetings and face our questioning several times. And through all of this, I think they've done it all with aplomb, and I congratulate them all, and I thank them for the hard work and for the fact that they brought us a balanced budget. So for all of you, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Seo. Mayor Pro Tem Tahar.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would echo Mr. Seo's thanks and for the staff's very, very hard work in bringing us a balanced budget to start out with. I think we lose sight of the fact of how much work goes into it before we see it. And I would also agree with Mr. Gearbach's points. I thought the process this year, well, process can always be better. And what I would like to see in the future is perhaps less focus on individual details of the budget and more time devoted to the principles that we're operating under. There were a number of things that came up that I would have preferred to spend more time on in discussion. And Mr. Gearbach mentioned the farmers market. That I think is a matter of policy that we gave somewhat short shrift to because we were under time pressure. And at the end of the budget process, another is Another example is the matter that Mr. CO brought up, Mr. Gearbach brought up regarding savings that have been achieved in one part of the budget being directed or earmarked for specific purposes rather than simply feeding the balance of the bottom line. That seems to me an interesting idea, but I really don't understand how that would work. And I think it would have been to all of our benefits to be able to explore that more and understand exactly, first of all, what Mr. CO actually meant, Mr. Gearbach, sorry, actually meant by that, and then to explore what the implications of that were. And as the budget process unfolded, we did not have an opportunity and time to do that. And so I think we would have benefited from that. And finally, I would say we might think about our timetable of establishing goals and strategic plan to precede the budget process a little bit more. That might also have informed some of the discussions we had. But obviously, I am in full support of the budget, including the farmers market portion of it. And thanks again to staff.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Additional comments? Councilwoman Mitchell.
Thank you. I also appreciate staff time, and being newer to this dais, I felt like for me personally, I needed some detail to understand some general trends. I'm torn about this budget. It is a balanced budget. It has more growth than I would like. I would have liked to have seen less growth in department budgets and then have more money put towards roads. And so I remain a little torn about this budget, but I certainly appreciate that we have a very dedicated staff. And I agree with the comments that have been said here tonight about the strategic plan, about the putting a solid number, as Mr. Gearbach suggests, putting a solid number towards savings. So thank you.
Additional comments? Well, let me address one thing first before I read a prepared statement. As it relates to strategic planning, I can state for the record, the city manager and I have had a number of conversations regarding our strategic plan for this next year, and I think we concur that the process should and will begin earlier, likely beginning in the fall of 2018. As opposed to the beginning of the calendar year, which is what happened this year. So those comments were heard, and they will be adopted as we begin to implement a strategic planning and goal process for the upcoming fiscal year. As it relates to the general operating budget, as I've stated in the past, our budget is a reflection of our values. And this budget invests in areas that have a direct bearing on our citizens' quality of life. Additionally, I'm proud of the strong investments this budget makes in areas of public safety and of infrastructure. It includes dollars for additional road projects, one new full-time employee at our Department of Public Works, and money for a school resource officer. I'll also note that at the beginning of the process, we began in the black with a growing unassigned fund balance, and I'm hopeful that a portion of that fund balance can be used later this year to pay down our liability, specifically relating to health care and pension. But moreover, that growing fund balance is indicative of how far our financial situation has come and how much it's improved in the past 6 years. And I think that perspective is really valuable and critical as we consider and ultimately vote on this budget. So I'll conclude by saying, like my colleagues, I greatly appreciate the amount of time and energy that staff put into this. Ms. Bennett, in particular, your department, and Ms. McDonough, please extend our sincere thanks. But to all of our employees and department heads who contributed to this process, it resulted in something that is good and positive for the people we represent. So we thank you for your service. If there's nothing further, then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by CO, seconded by Tahar, to acknowledge receipt and to approve and to adopt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it, and the motion carries. We proceed now to new business, item 18-115. This is proclamation designating June as Pride Month. This will be a motion to approve and adopt the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender Pride Month resolution designating June as Pride Month.
Move to approve and adopt.
Second.
Thank you. So it's been moved by Gearboss, seconded by Tahar, and again, just to acknowledge for the record, we are referencing the most latest version, which is actually entitled LGBTQ Pride Month, that was prepared and distributed earlier today. Moved and seconded by Gearboss, seconded by Tahar. Discussion. I'll begin with Mr. Gearboss and then jump to Mayor Pro Tem Tahar.
One of the reasons why I wanted to bring this back to council to consider is because we haven't done it in a few years, but now that we have our non-discrimination ordinance, and because of the face and the issues that are facing many of these individuals from our Washington offices and the discrimination that is basically being done to our veterans and to individuals that have served this country, it's clear that we need to continue representing and fighting for their rights and their beliefs. This is simply an idea that individuals such as this are no different than anyone else. They should not be discriminated against. But in this time and nature, we know that everybody's being discriminated against, regardless of what's happening, and we need to continue to fight in every mode and manner that we can. Even today, when the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 in their decision, it's setting a precedent, and so some of these precedents are going to have to be dealt with, and we're not sure how it's going to play out. But as we know that it's getting harder and harder in this country to, I guess, be acceptable and not to be attacked, wherever we can, even at the local level, we need to be fighting for individual rights. And I appreciate consideration. I know that some of the wording was changed after this was proposed, and so I appreciate the consideration for this tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Gearboss. Mayor Pro Tem Tahar.
Yes, thank you. A person might say that a proclamation is merely symbolic, but I think the symbolism is extremely important. We took a major step in March, I believe it was, when we enacted the non-discrimination ordinance, and that as an expression of the values of our community was a huge step. And I think this proclamation is a way to underscore we are not forgetting that, and that it remains a high priority and it is a value in our community.
Very good.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Councilwoman Mitchell.
Thank you, Your Honor. I absolutely support this resolution. I think it is important that any individual that could be underserved in our community knows that they have advocates in our community. We might not look like advocates. You might not be aware of it walking down the street, but we will stand up for others. We will not allow people to be bullied and taken down. We value everyone in this community, and I'm really proud of this resolution. I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Additional comments? Well, let me just say that I acknowledge and I respect the passion and enthusiasm that served as a genesis for bringing this forward. And while I'm not generally inclined to support this type of approach, I do believe that there were modifications made between Thursday and today that will put me in a position of being supportive. And I will note two. One is that this resolution clearly states that all of our citizens contribute tangibly to our community to make it the place that it is. And second, it also acknowledges deficiencies that exist in policy and statute that deprive some of our citizens of basic rights. And again, this was addressed during the consideration and ultimately the implementation of our non-discrimination ordinance, that in both the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, which is a state law, and the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is a federal law, there are not protections granted for gay, lesbian, or bisexual individuals. So I think bringing awareness to that and advocating for additional changes is appropriate. So again, while this is not necessarily an approach that I personally favor, I think there have been changes made that make me inclined to support it at least this year. So again, thank you for everyone's work on this. Additional comments? They will proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Tahar, to approve and to adopt All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 18-116. This is street project amendments. This is a motion to acknowledge receipt of the May 30th, 2018 memo from City Superintendent Engineer Rubel and to approve or not to approve the recommendation for a second amendment to the contract with D.N. Higgins Incorporated in a not-to-exceed amount of $148,208.95. Is there a motion?
Move to approve?
How about to
Acknowledge and approve, pardon me.
Thank you, Councilwoman Mitchell. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Seal. Mr. Rubel, do you care to make comment on your memo of May the 30th?
Well, just for the viewing residents or residents here, we are rescinding the Barn Street project for a higher profile project that would serve more customers on a section of road that is probably worse condition. We performed this for Woodland Drive because we had learned probably later in the year or earlier in the spring that we would not get the bridge funding. We thought that was tied into that, so that now freed that up as a candidate also. So it makes it a viable project. We actually are going to enhance the intersection of Colony and Woodland Drive West west, because it needs some ADA improvements, plus it's in very poor condition, so that adds a little cost to the project, but still a viable project. And we had intended to transfer some funds if we had to from the major to local, but we currently have the funds available in the local street fund to fund all this project.
Very good.
For FY19, by the way, because it was actually scheduled for FY19. We're carrying the contract through from the current contract, and we're going to carry it into FY19. Higgins is willing to do that.
Very good. Questions for Mr. Rubel? Ms. Dillon?
I just wanted to ask, the bottom half of your memo, highlighted in bold, it says add Woodland for 148,208.95. Then the last line of the last paragraph says increase from 120 to 160. So is the 148 not the actual number? Is it actually up to 160?
Well, the budget number is higher than the construction number, because that's just the construction materials and equipment and manpower for that. We have some engineering, geotechnical testing, and perhaps contingencies, but 160 will give us enough money just to handle the entire project without going over that. We would definitely be under the 160.
Okay, so then what is the 148?
That's the amend the contract with Higgins. See, it's a set number based on unit prices for the project. That's the construction figure.
Okay.
That's the work plan. They actually have to remove curb, remove asphalt, put new asphalt down, do the physical labor on it, and then, of course, the reason the budget's more because we have to add MCI engineering to it and anything else that comes up.
Thank you.
Additional questions for Mr. Rubel? Ms. Mitchell?
I guess I just need a clarification. If we have, as Ms. Dillon pointed out, if we have a possibility of going up to 160, does our proposal not need to say that? And I guess I'm confused why it doesn't say up to 160 rather than the 148.
I'm going to let Mr. Campbell address that, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So while the actual project itself is the 148 and change, we would propose, I believe we're bringing the capital improvement budget to you all at the next meeting for consideration. We would make that change, present that to you. The 160 is Mr. Rubel said, would be potential, basically $12,000 or just under $12,000 worth of contingencies for anything additional. But this 148, 208 is the actual amount, the bid amount for this specific project for Higgins.
I see. All right, thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
Additional questions? Mr. Rubel, thank you. Any subsequent discussion on the motion? Then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Mitchell, seconded by CO to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 18-117. This is support agreement for addiction prevention. This is a motion to acknowledge receipt of the May 2018 memo from City Manager Campbell and to approve or not to approve the support agreement for the Saline Community Addiction Prevention Task Force.
Move to acknowledge.
Moved by Gearbox to acknowledge. Is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Tahar. Mr. Campbell, do you care to comment?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is similar to, you may recall, a few years ago, City Council decided to contribute towards the Saline Leadership Institute. And as you all know, the city just can't simply donate or contribute. They need to get some sort of service, quid pro quo in return. And so the service, of course, for Saline Leadership is that it's training up current and future leaders for the community, whether it's serving on city boards and commissions or other organizations within the community. This is similar in the Saline Community Addiction Prevention Task Force, a mouthful, but you may recall that started off as a task force appointed by the mayor and council a couple years ago, and now has evolved into its own. It's been spun off from the city, and its own 501c3. So, in order to be able to contribute, we need again to have an agreement in place for to receive a service, which would be towards educating an addiction to prevent addictions. And so that's what this agreement does. It's the current budget that we're in is fiscal year 18, which does expire at the end of this month, June 30. But there is $1,500 allocated in the current budget for this organization to provide those services to the community, and then in the budget that you all just approved for fiscal year 19, there's $1,000. So in this, if this is in place, then that money can be complete the allocation to to the organization to provide those services to the community.
Very good. Questions for the city manager? Mr. Gearbox?
So this agreement is identical to what we have with SLI?
Similar.
Similar. Do we have the automatic renewal for every year?
I don't believe, I have to double check. I don't know that we have the automatic renewal with the Saline Leadership.
Yeah, because one of my questions is if we're agreeing to $1,500 this year, and you mentioned that $1,000 next year, that would indicate that this doesn't sound right in the terms of it. It says the city shall contribute $1,500 to the task force on before June, and it says this agreement shall be for the term of 1 year, but renew automatically for additional 9 years unless one party provides, but it doesn't mention the $1,000. I guess I'm confused. Is this going to allow for a change in the amount that we support, or is it always going to be $1,500?
My understanding that it does, but we could certainly get that clarification.
Yeah. Part of my thing is, I don't have a problem with having this agreement. I do have an issue with it being an automatic renewal.
Sure.
I would rather it be something that, just like the SLI, comes up for a review by council without necessarily having an auto. Because if somebody forgets to deal with this for 90 days prior to the date, then it automatically is going to have to be funded.
Sure.
Well, let me stay on that point for a second and defer to the chair of the task force, who also serves as a council colleague of ours, Councilwoman Dillon. Councilwoman, would you have any objection if a modification was made to indicate that a contribution would be contingent upon review and approval by City Council on an annual basis?
No, not at all.
Okay. Why don't we do this then?
And I
Please.
would like to just make,
Yeah,
I will
absolutely.
not be voting on this because as the chair, I will be signing the document. I don't have a vested interest, but it's just better to be separate.
Okay, we appreciate that. Why don't we do this? Can you make that change and maybe bring it back for consideration at our next council meeting?
Yeah, we have one more meeting before the end of June. so
That work?
That would be fine.
Okay. That change will be made. Were there any other questions or comments about the document? Mr. Hart? I'm sorry.
This is a general question, both about this agreement and the agreement with SLI, and that is, do we ever see the total budget for these groups and how our contribution fits in? do we ever review the budgets?
Well, what I would recommend, because I know this is forthcoming, Councilman Dillon can maybe elaborate. I know that you're going to be presenting on behalf of the task force at one of our upcoming meetings.
At our next meeting.
At our next meeting. Well, then perhaps at our next meeting, if it's not too onerous to you and your colleagues on the task force, perhaps you can address the budget and the financial needs of the group.
Yes, that would be fine.
Very good.
And,
Please.
and perhaps we could request the same thing from SLI?
Mr. Campbell, do you like to make note of that and reach out to the leadership of SLI?
If I could too, and I certainly will do that, but unless there's, I mean, one idea, we would just strike this term, right? This agreement shall be for a one-year term?
So you strike clause 2?
Right, well, you'd keep the first part, this agreement shall be for a term of 1 year, period, and we would eliminate, but will renew automatically for 9 additional terms unless one party provides,
So
et
just,
cetera.
let me see this real quick, if I may. So we would eliminate all the verbiage after that.
Correct.
I think that works. And
Okay.
then we wouldn't have to postpone.
That way it could get,
Yeah, and then we can deal with next year for the
Okay.
$1,000 a different.
Ms. Mitchell?
I just wanted to point that the opioid crisis is a national public health problem, that we have seen the death rates, for example, for white males, I think it's over 50 or 55. They are more likely to die now from addiction than as previously from a heart attack. So I think it's vital that we, as a city, as we're looking at the well-being of our citizens, that we do support this type of effort and continue to partner with our schools and other community stakeholders to address this really serious public health threat.
Very good. Thank you. If there's nothing further, oh,
I
please,
did
Krista.
want, so just clarifying what Mr. Gearba had said, there is not a clause that refers to the future $1,000. So did you want to bring this back as a separate document, or did you want to add verbiage now?
I think what I'm going to recommend, unless the city manager advises me not to, is that after we proceed with the current motion, which has been moved by Gearboss, seconded by Tar to acknowledge receipt, that we vote to approve this agreement. But under terms and conditions, item 2, we would modify that line, say term, the agreement shall be for 1 year, period, striking the additional language from but to stated above.
And then a new agreement will have to be
correct.
created.
Right,
for the
then we
next
draft
1,000.
for fiscal year 19, we would draft another agreement and bring it back to you all for consideration.
Everyone clear on that? I'll repeat it when we get to the next motion. All right, there's a motion on the floor moved by Gearboss, seconded by Tar to acknowledge receipt of the May 2018 memo from the city manager. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. The next motion will be a motion to approve or not to approve the support agreement as amended for the Saline Community Addiction Prevention Task Force.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by Gearboss, seconded by Mitchell. And again, the one change is under terms and conditions, item 2, it will now read, this agreement shall be for 1 year, period, striking the additional language. Discussion. Then we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approving the amended agreement signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you all. We move on now to new business item 18-118. This is Ann Arbor Street HMA Cold Milling and Resurfacing Project. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the May 31st, 2018 memo from DPW Director Fordyce and to authorize and approve or not to approve the mayor and city manager to sign the project agreement with Washtenaw County Road Commission for a 1-inch cold mill and resurfacing of North Ann Arbor Street, Saline Ann Arbor Road from Woodland Drive northly to the city limits in the amount of $50,100.
I'll move to acknowledge and authorize, but it's 2-inch instead of 1-inch, according to the write-up. Mayor, you'd said 1-inch?
Oh, excuse me. I don't know how I got 1 inch, Mr. Gearbock. Thank you for noting that. Yes, the motion does say 2. Moved by Gearbock to acknowledge receipt and to authorize and to approve. And you're seconding, Mr. CO?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fordyce, the floor is yours.
Thank you. At the May 7th work session, we looked at some candidates for additions to our road construction projects for fiscal 19. This was one of them. This is the stretch of North Ann Arbor Street from Woodland north to the city limits. Specifically, this project would start at the current stop bar and go all the way to the northern limits. The construction would be done, managed by the Washtenaw County Road Commission on our behalf. And the agreement here basically is a contract with the Road Commission for them to execute that work, and then we'll pay them when it's done.
Do you recall off the top of your head, Mr. Fordyce, at that May, or at that work meeting when we just initially discussed this project, What was the amount you estimated it would?
My estimate for this was a little north of $87,000. Yeah. So this has come in,
So good news.
yeah, good news, this has come in well under that.
Yeah, very good. Okay, excellent. Well, it's good to be conservative in your estimates. Are there questions for Mr. Fordyce? Discussion on the motion. It's easy enough. We're all pretty enthusiastic about this. Then we'll proceed to vote. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate your time on it. Been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by CO to acknowledge and to authorize and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to the discussion portion of our agenda. First up is commission, committee, and task force reports from council members. We'll start with CO and then move to Tahar.
The cemetery task force met. We discussed several issues, the RFP that's out for the replacement or for the repair of the windows at the mausoleum. Also, an amendment to the cemetery rules is proposed that will eventually come to council for their review and approval.
In fact, I can elaborate on that if you'll indulge me, Mr. Seal. That will actually be coming to council for consideration at our next meeting on June 18th. The clerk got the revised draft back from the attorney's office, I think this weekend or early today. It's been emailed out to the group. Assuming there's no objections, I will be drafting a cover memo, and it will go to city council again on June 18th for consideration.
I did have one question about that. In one of the clauses there, it says repair or repair/replacement. And I'm wondering if replacement is the appropriate word in there. And
Well, because it was put in there because they can replace it, but we're only going to pay the cost to repair.
oh, okay, very good, thank you.
Anything further, Mr. Seal?
No,
No?
thank you.
Mr. Hart?
Yes, from the Environmental Commission, first, a reminder that an all-shred event will take place on June 23rd here at City Hall from 9 till noon. This is because there's a fee for this. We have a sponsor, but there is a fee for this service. The sponsor is the Schmerberger Law Firm. But because there is a fee for this service, it's restricted to residents of the city. And look for more information about this. I did not make a note of, there's also a limit to the number of banker's boxes equivalent of paper that you can bring. So once again, June 23rd from 9 till noon, and look for more information to be coming out. And then just an update on or report on the e-waste day. We had this year 360 cars came through, and 20,575 pounds of e-waste were collected for recycling.
Excellent. Very good. Additional committee, commissioner task force reports. Mr. Gearboss.
Just a question to follow up to Mr. Seals. When do you anticipate that the bid for the mausoleum windows will be coming forward to council to be?
Mr. Fordyce,
I got a
perhaps?
question for Mr. Fordyce to address, since he's the one who worked on that.
The bids are due June 15th, and so I'll take a look at what we get and bring forth the,
Oh, so really the RFP just went out. It wasn't the bids have actually come in yet?
they have not come in yet. Yeah, they come in.
Thanks. Thank you.
Additional committee, commissioner task force reports. How about reports or other announcements, and we'll end this section by going over our strategic plan, or strategic planning document, excuse me. I just have two then. One, I sent you all an email, and I just wanted to announce for the public's benefit that on June the 22nd at the Saline Area Senior Center, I will be hosting my 7th annual senior conference. It is a completely free event with free breakfast, free lunch, breakout sessions, and government panel. I would invite my colleagues to attend if your schedules permit. Only stipulation is it is first come, first served. There's a capacity, a ceiling of people we can accommodate. So if you'd like to attend, it's open to any Saline area senior over the age of 65. You just need to call the senior center to RSVP. And I think the limit is about 100. Usually we develop a wait list, and if someone cancels or backs out, we'll be sure to contact you to let you know that you are able and permitted to attend. And the second thing is, I'm reminded to announce this because I see Mr. Peralt in the audience. I wanted to thank and acknowledge all those who helped to make our Memorial Day parade and festivities a success. I think everything went perfectly, minus the weather, but you didn't have any control over that. So I thought it was a really, really nice parade, nice program at the cemetery, and a marvelous way to honor our fallen heroes. So thank you to all who contributed to its success. Are there other reports or announcements? Mr. Gearbaugh.
Other announcement, tomorrow night from 5:30 to 7:30, I believe, is our parking study open meeting for people to come contribute. It's here at City Hall, I believe, right?
Correct.
So it's to talk about downtown parking and whatever alternatives and things, so we encourage people to show up for that.
I have a quick question, Your Honor, about
Please.
that, if that's appropriate.
Yep.
Is that, is there a set program, or it truly is an open house where someone can come in, you know, say if they get off work at 6:30, they can come in and they won't miss presentations, or are there presentations at 5:30?
My understanding is that Rich and Associates, the consultant conducting the study, they're planning to have, I think, on the hour presentations. So they'll have a chance for a couple.
Okay,
Couple
thank
of
you.
If there are no additional reports or announcements, Mr. Campbell, do you want to discuss this, this planning document that I think came about subsequent to a meeting you had this past week with Councilwoman Dillon and Mitchell?
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So at the last council meeting, while the strategic plan for fiscal year 19 was approved, there was some questions, concerns on the format. And so met with Councilmembers Dillon and Mitchell to discuss possible different ways, different formatting. And this is, and I know Councilmember Mitchell is going to be working on some potential other possible formats, but I came up with this one and borrowed it from another community. So as most of you know, plagiarizing in city government is not necessarily a bad thing. So
Ultimate form of flattery.
Yep. So anyway, so this is an example of, and so my thought was that since the current document it's a policy document, that the format potentially would remain the same, but then use this as a supplemental to track the status of the goals and objectives, if that would meet the needs. So that this is, I just took just as an example, what that first quarter could look like for some of the, just a hand, again, this was just a, without going through the whole document, but this is an example.
Ladies, Councilwoman Mitchell and then Dillon, thoughts on this document?
Thank you, Your Honor. I haven't had a whole lot of time to look at it. I do appreciate that there is, it looks like a quarterly update format. One of the things that we discussed during our meeting, and I would actually really appreciate my colleagues' notes on this, Councilwoman Dillon suggested that we have some type of a cost just for budgeting purposes. As we're making decisions through the year, it can be difficult to remember where we started, and that having kind of a cost that we thought something was going to come in, that might help us make decisions throughout the year rather than kind of lose that information in the shuffle. So that's something that I would be interested in hearing other people's opinions about.
Okay. Ms. Dillon?
I will echo what Ms. Mitchell said. Yes, we were talking about costs, also funding source. Is there grant opportunities? Is this just a budget line item? And the idea was so that we can plan. I mean, this is supposed to help us to develop our budget. So, in a perfect world, it will be done before the budget season going forward. And so we can look at it, but then we can also reference back to it is the idea, and why we're looking more at a spreadsheet format than the current bullet points, is that if a project gets stalled out for some reason, there are other opportunities to look and say, hey, we can reevaluate, and what we thought was going to be a simple project is not, so maybe we're going to reallocate to another goal.
Okay. Additional thoughts from the dais? Mr. Gearbaugh?
I like this format because it tells us basically how you've progressed throughout each quarter. I know we had, the other one was kind of a little more summary. At least this one, I can see how you actually are progressing throughout the year. In terms of the dollar amounts, some of these are more policy and practices, and how you would actually quantify a dollar amount to it is going to be difficult. I think you could identify maybe a particular project or something as it's accomplished or achieved to meet one of these goals, and maybe if it happens in that quarter, that might be doable. I think this is more of something we'd have to look at when we actually go to do our strategic planning in the future, is how to figure out how do you actually assign a dollar amount to these unless they're a specific project. I mean, you could always say, okay, community action, excuse me, I can't read, tourism plan, CTAP projects, those I could see maybe have a potential dollar amount because we know that we've identified a grant or something that's come in for it. But on some of these other ones, like work on increasing downtown foot traffic, I don't know what we would say. You could throw $100,000 at that and maybe achieve it, maybe not. So it's kind of, I can see where you're coming from. It's more of how do we manage that, and I think there needs to be a lot more thought into that, so it doesn't become more of a, like an accounting approach instead of being more of a policy in tracking how we're achieving the actual policies.
Yeah, my recommendation, I'm
Sense?
sorry, Mr. Gearba.
I just wanted, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense to me. In fact, that would be my recommendation as well. I think there are, some of these goals, I think it would be incredibly difficult to put a dollar amount on. I think if there is a specific project or initiative associated with them, there could be a general dollar amount. But I think Mr. Gearbaugh's recommendation is one I would prefer to follow, which is between now and when we start our goal, our strategic planning later this calendar year, that we think about how we can better incorporate dollar amounts into particular goals and objectives. That would be my thought anyways. Additional thoughts from the dais? Ms. McClellan?
Yeah, I agree. I think, I mean, I think it can't hurt if there are specific projects that have dollar amounts that would be associated with them, but to try and do the work to figure out what the dollar amounts are, it seems like a heck of a lot of work for maybe not any real positive gain to it. But I think this is nice to have this, you know, in this format. I don't necessarily have issue with the other one either particularly, but this is easier, I think, visually to track on how we're doing with the goals, so I appreciate that.
I'm not hearing any objections from the dais then in utilizing this general format. If I recall from Mr. Campbell's statements just moments ago, Ms. Mitchell, were you going to identify and share some other examples on how information could be disseminated?
Yes, in fact, Ms. Dillon and I worked to come up with one, and it looks somewhat similar to this without the quarterly reports.
Okay.
It just had a tracking bar as far as, you know.
Okay. If you still wanted to share that with the city manager, I think that would be,
Okay.
Great. Yeah.
All right.
Additional comments from the dais? Mr. Har?
Well, I would just echo what's been said already. On first glance, this looks like a very easily accessible document. It's easy to understand at a glance. And I also like the tracking quarter by quarter, how that would show up. And I agree, I think, with Mr. Gearbaugh about dollar amounts, sort of putting them in retrospectively to goals that we've already or objectives we've already set, seems a little forced, but it's something we could give thought to on the next go round, I think.
Very good.
Okay.
Mr. Seal, and then jump back to Mr. Gearbaugh, and then Ms. Dillon.
I guess I always thought of the strategic planning effort as just that, a strategic plan, more of a policy guideline set by council to set some standards and some achievable goals for staff to work on. I think if you try to put too fine a point on it, it becomes more, or especially a budget amount, it then becomes more of a business plan, if you will. And I'm not sure we want to get to that point with this. I think what we're trying to do in our efforts every year is to say, here's what we think the general policy is that the sorts of goals we're trying to achieve as a city, the kinds of things our constituents have made us aware of that are important to them, and let the city staff work on the actual details, I think. But I think, I do like this reporting format. I think it provides a great deal of information to us on a regular basis about how these things are proceeding, so that we know that they're not just lying fallow or that they've been forgotten.
Very good. Mr. Gearbaugh, and then we'll conclude with Ms. Dillon.
Just real quick, the only thing I would like to actually add to this is I know we do 1 year, but I'd also most likely to take it out 2 and 3, because we do have multi-year goals and projects, but we don't necessarily know what we're phasing in those couple of years, and we might have that information just so that we can move 1 year to the next as we, as we knock off a year, we just move the 2 years, and then we build upon that going forward if things change.
It's a good idea. You can do that. Ms. Dillon?
Okay, I just wanted to touch base. I wanted to thank Mr. Campbell for taking the time and creating this. I appreciate him taking the time to meet with us and listen to our concerns and come up with this. Just to clarify, the column that I'm referring to with costs, not everything is going to have a cost associated with. Some things are just, not necessarily free, but don't have direct costs associated with them. But there are things where, if you were to look at our strategic plan, installation of welcome to downtown signage, how are we going to budget for that if we're not allocating, if we're not determining money? Are we going to say, okay, and that's the piece of it that I was trying to look at, of, okay, is this something we're going to it's going to sit out there till we can get a grant for it? Are we going to try to find dollars in a budget? Are we going to partner with other groups? So that was what I was looking at. I'm not looking at firm numbers, just sort of general sense.
Okay. Here's the consensus that I'm hearing from the dais. One, Councilwoman Mitchell and Dillon have some additional information and resources that they can provide to the city manager. I don't think there's any objection from the dais on providing dollar amounts for really specific projects and initiatives where there's no ambiguity in terms of what the cost is going to be. So I think that can be provided or added by staff. And then I think Mr. Gearbaugh's suggestion about adding a column or 2 columns to take this out 2 or 3 years, which reflects what our strategic planning document contains is appropriate and reasonable. All right, Ms. McClellan?
Yeah, for the cost though, I mean, are we gonna just say it's an estimate? Because I feel like a lot of that stuff is gonna be fluid.
I mean, it will be.
Okay.
Yeah, it will be.
I mean, I don't want us to get so into this that, okay, well, we only said we were gonna spend, $50,000 on this, and now it's 75, and then we get into a back and forth about when it was an estimate all along, and it was just sort of a.
And I will say this in conclusion, too. I think that, I don't recall who brought it up first, maybe it was Mr. Gearbaugh. I think perhaps when we begin this process for the next fiscal year, so fiscal year 2019, 2020, that we maybe have a discussion with our consultant and staff on how we can enumerate costs in a way that's not only helpful to council, but also not too onerous on our staff members who are having to generate those numbers. Okay. Mr. Hard?
Yes, also thinking about adding the cost information for projects for which there are actually definable costs. I would also say I wouldn't want us in our strategic planning to get ourselves all bottlenecked while we worry about dollars and cents, and thinking perhaps part of the quarterly reports as the planning year goes along could include the costs that staff have determined to be relevant to a particular project. The planning process, I just don't want it to get tied up in knots about dollars and cents during the planning and conceptualizing part of the process.
Well, my plan was that we will clean it up and present it at the end of the first quarter as the first. But I would, if I could, just briefly to Mr. Harv's comments. you know, as we talked earlier, as Mayor, you talked earlier about how we got further into the budget than we typically do prior to, you know, knowing what the strategic plan is going forward. And so, you know, the plan, right, is to just go back to the way we had done it previous years, where it's, for the most part, completed, or at least in a rough form. We know what, so then then staff can utilize that direction as we propose a budget going forward. So I guess one thought would be in the updates to provide, you know, whether something's on budget or not on budget.
I don't think there'd be any objection to that.
But as far to, I mean, because that, to me, that's to Mr. Hart's point about getting all bottlenecked up and looking at dollars. I mean, that's part of the budget process.
Yeah. I think that'd be a good way to convey the information.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to convey the information that folks are looking for. Okay. So you're clear on what the next steps are, Mr. Campbell?
I believe so.
Okay, very good. And ladies, again, if you want to provide some additional resources and examples to staff, I think they would welcome that. Mr. Campbell, you're on deck then for wastewater treatment plant update.
Okay. So this was as of Friday afternoon, June 1st. There were no order complaints to date since the last council meeting. Nutrigrow emptied our front tank for land application of the sludge, and they hopefully will be coming back this week. Weather dependent, of course. The fields that they use need to be able to be fairly dry so they can get their rigs into them for the application. Let's see. Well, just some. I mean, the Nova filters are operating, but I think Mr. Fetchik mentioned about these backwash pump filters baskets that continue to clog. And I know as recently as today, he sent me. They were going to, after talking with the manufacturer, with Nova, they're going to try a different type of larger basket, I believe is my understanding, to resolve the clogging issue. And at the last meeting we talked about Mr. Loy, Dan Loy from Nova, that was scheduled previously to come here tonight to address the council about the filter issues, and then of course unfortunately his death in the family and was not able to. So he's looking at July 9th, which would be the first meeting in July, if that's acceptable to.
Unless there's objections from the dais, I think you go ahead and schedule that.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Questions for the city manager? Mr. Gearbaugh and then Ms. Mitchell?
Appreciate I got the letter in the mail that notified about the water treatment plant and the sludge hauling and everything, so I think that was a great way to communicate out. When you mentioned the Nova filters and the bigger baskets, it's just a larger capacity. My worry is that they're going to make bigger holes and allow more stuff out. But I don't know. I'm waiting to hear how they solve that, because I thought the issue was that too much sludge or it doesn't filter it properly to release it. So whatever. I'm just looking forward to having another solution.
Yeah.
Ms. Mitchell?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Campbell, I remember Mr. Skull coming and talking about a short-term solution of adding a hydrogen peroxide treatment. Is that still happening?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm happy to hear about that, and I'm really happy that there were no complaints.
Just so we're clear, on a daily basis.
A daily basis,
Right,
correct.
that's pumped into the headworks where it first comes into the plant. It's right there that the hydrogen peroxide gets pumped into it.
So that's really good news. My second question was, where are we on the odor abatement project?
We have a pre-construction meeting scheduled for next week, Monday or Tuesday. So I think I put in a previous communique. They were just working on getting the contractor getting some other documentation around to move forward. So that's where we're at currently.
Okay. I would like to request that we have that update included at least once a month along with our wastewater treatment plant update. It's one thing in a communique, but I think here in a public forum, there's value in spreading the word a little bit about the progress there.
We can do that.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, then last but certainly not least, Chief Hart, DPW Director Fordyce. I asked for an update on issues of walkability and safety along Henry Street. It's an issue we discussed several months back. I know we have increased enforcement. We have some traffic indication signs that have been placed in strategic places. And Mr. Fordyce, if I recall correctly from our previous discussion, you were going to do some further analysis on the intersection of Henry and Ann Arbor Street. So Chief Hart, do you want to begin, and then we'll transition to Mr. Fordyce and then open it up for questions?
Absolutely. In looking at the data that we store at the police department, since January, we have had 111 traffic stops on Henry Street, both East and West Henry. Of those, 78 have been for speeding violations. Now, I've requested the officers lower their threshold to pay specific attention to vehicles that are doing 5 or 7 over. And they've responded very well. I'm very proud of their enforcement efforts. What we've seen is in January, let's say we had 34 traffic stops. In February, we had 33. March, as a result of the enforcement, we're down to 14. We're seeing less and less speeding on Henry Street when we are out there. April, there were 11. And of course, we had some bad weather moments in there as well, some ice storms, some snowstorms, a lot of rain. In May, we've had a slight uptick to 19 traffic stops. So I think we're starting to see some seasonal changes as well as people are starting to get out and drive a little bit more. School's about to get out. But like I say, 78 of the 111 traffic stops have been for speeding, so that's about 70%. The officers have a good balance of writing tickets to their traffic stops. We've handled 2 accidents along Henry Street. It looks about 14 stop sign violations along there as well. 1 drunk driving arrest and 1 driving while license suspended. So those are our enforcement efforts. Maybe something in March as well. On March 7th, the speed signs were deployed. So we did see a drastic decrease from February of 33 traffic stops down to 14 in March. And I believe that people are paying attention to the signs, and when the lights are flashing and then their speed is flashing, we see that in looking at the data on the traffic signs. We have 2 signs, and what I've done is I want one on East Henry and one on West Henry, paying attention to vehicles going westbound, and then we flip them for the next week, and we catch people going eastbound and monitor their traffic. So we see things that are very consistent with our observations, is that both on East and West Henry, right around 7 in the morning, 7 to 8 is the busiest time as far as volume. And then in the evening, we're looking at about 3 to 5 p.m. being the most volume, traffic volume at that time. Interestingly, the average speeds, now these are average, these are not highs and lows, but averaging out the speeds at 215 East Henry for westbound traffic, the average speed is about 23 miles an hour. Eastbound on East Henry was about just over 23 miles an hour. On West Henry was 21, and then 22 miles an hour are the average speeds. So again, that doesn't take into account, the vehicles that are, exceeding the speed limit, those high and low ends. What we do see is we've been able to use the data to look at when vehicles are driving the fastest and the time of day, and then we've been able to deploy our resources out there. Overall, I'm seeing very good signs of very good indications on the use of the signs. 85% of the vehicles that when they see the signs and the lights are flashing are slowing. So I was sat out there for a little while early this morning and a little bit more in the afternoon today, and couldn't find a car that was doing more than 27, 28 miles an hour. But looking in my rearview mirror, as people come up on the signs and they're flashing, the lights are flashing, I see their brake lights come on. So it has had an effect. At some point, we are going to have to move the signs around the city. We do have some other areas that do need to have some attention with the speed signs, but I feel that a combination of the officers going out there and doing their jobs very well and doing the traffic enforcement, And the speed signs has at least, from the police department's perspective, looking at the data, hopefully we'll hear some good news from council members that live along Henry Street. But I feel that our enforcement efforts have had a great impact.
Chief, two quick questions before we turn it over to Mr. Fordyce. One, for the record, I assume that you and your department are still going to be cognizant of the issues on East and West Henry and deploy your officers when you deem it appropriate. And then two, to follow up on your comment about the speed indicator signs, approximately how long will you continue to have them placed in strategic positions along East or West Henry before they're relocated elsewhere?
I would say that we will always have at least one of the signs on Henry Street, somewhere along, whether it's east or west, but we will look at deploying at least one sign there. I'd like to move some over to Old Creek. We're talking about maybe getting some poles put up in Huntington Woods where we can utilize the sign in that neighborhood as well. So we are going to move that around a little bit. But I'd always like to keep at least one sign in there. It's the volume, the average volume is pretty high. So I think there are those people that occasionally come through there and they look at the road and, they just drive faster than the speed limit.
Right. Before we open up for additional questions, Mr. Fordyce, do you care to make a brief comment about the work that you've done in the interim here between our last discussion and our current?
Sure. In May, we got additional speed limit signs installed along Henry Street. Prior to that, there were 2. There are now 12. So no excuses for not knowing the speed limit there. One of the recommendations that came out of the speed study that we did was to look at different pavement markings. So that, I just received the draft options of that tonight via email, so I haven't had a chance to look at those yet, but I'll review those and bring those to a future council meeting to consider our options there. Another thing that came out of that speed study, we also did a study of the intersection of Henry and South Ann Arbor for the possibility of signalization or four-way stop. Found that neither of those were warranted, but council requested further study to look for some ideas to improve pedestrian safety and comfort there. That study is in progress. The field work, the survey work has been done, and the analysis is ongoing.
Very good. Well, let's start at the opposite end of the dais, and we'll take time to, I'll take this opportunity to see if each council member has questions, concerns, or comments. I'll start with Councilwoman Mitchell and end with Councilmember Seal.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you both so much. This is an issue that residents were rightly upset about, and I'm so pleased to see these changes. I think they were reasonable changes, economic ones, targeted, pretty much following the blueprint for a perfect plan. I have heard anecdotal stories from residents that their feelings on the traffic is that it has been improved. So it's nice to have the data that backs that up. As far as questions, I think that those speed indicator signs are kind of going to be on my wish list now. As far as other areas of the city, they seem to be very effective, and the fact that they can collect data and really help us target our police work where it needs to go. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Mr. Fordyce about the pavement markings and the study on that Henry Street and South Ann Arbor intersection. I still have people who are concerned about that, so thank you.
Very good. Councilwoman McClellan.
I appreciate it. I see it every day. So it's, I don't know if you were out there this morning. I went by, it was like, whoop, slow down, even for me. It's just that, it's that mental, like I wasn't going over the speed limit, but it's just that check. And I think that the signs do it and the officers do it, and I really appreciate it. As someone that is a resident on West Henry Street, I have noticed that the speeds are slower, especially that downhill route at the very bottom of the hill. I don't see the excessive speeds that we used to see. So I am glad to see the data backing that up as well. Other than a few tailgating situations here and there, trying to pull in my driveway and getting people mad at me for pulling into my driveway, it's been much improved. I'm just curious as to if you've noticed anything with parade detours or any, I think we've only probably had one parade.
Correct.
For, whether that affected the speeds, I don't really notice it too much because generally there's more traffic and they go slower because there's more traffic, but just was curious on that. But I appreciate all your work, and I'm anxious to see what the results of the intersection study have to say, because I do think that improvement will be much appreciated, so. That's it for me.
Mr. Gearboss.
Of course, it seems like the squeaky wheel normally gets most of the attention, and I know Henry Street was one of those, and I'm glad that we were able to address some of this, but I do know that there are a number of other streets that we're going to have to figure out how to balance the enforcement, and I know that's on your shoulders to try and figure that out. I think this approach has worked well, but I know from complaints that I've heard from on Mills, on Maple, my street, South Ann Arbor Street, Old Creek, which you've already identified, how we can address those, because more of our heavy trafficked streets have people just flying up the hills and going through it at 45, 50 miles an hour. And it's worse than what's been happening on Henry Street at some points. I do agree, back when we were at the detour going through there, was an amazing issue. And I think now we've got more of the, you're marking things and putting all that stuff in there. I just want to make sure that we're being cognizant of all the other concerns, and especially where certain areas may have just got on the radar in the last couple months, that they may be getting a little more attention than some of the other streets that have been suffering for years.
Is that Mr. Gearboss' microphone that's causing?
It was whistling, wasn't it? It was kind of,
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's just microphone.
okay.
Someone can make sure that microphone is checked, because I got a lot of feedback and static as Mr. Gearboss spoke. Well, one comment and one question. I did forward an email from a longtime resident who lives at the corner of, Rebecca Schneider would be at Mark, Hannah, and Henry, who was very appreciative in regards to additional enforcement and visibility, and how accessible and engaged the police department and you, specifically Chief, have been. So that was a very nice compliment that I shared with my council colleagues. This question, the genesis for this question relates to comments that have been made by Mr. Gearbaugh and others about other areas in town where we have individuals who drive recklessly or speed. The speed indicator signs that have proven beneficial on Henry, what's the approximate cost of one of those?
We budgeted about $7,500, I believe, last year. You had budgeted for the 2 signs. Where we really start to get into a cost is the maintenance of the software. Is about $1,500 per year per sign. So, and it also carries with it a warranty. Now, I did meet with the gentleman who does our in-car camera system, WatchGuard. He has sent me some information on his signs, and they look like a really good product. I'm waiting for some quotes to come in for that. So I am looking for some alternatives as well. And there's a way to kind of get around that $1,500 a year by buying a handheld where we can just download the data at each sign. It's not as convenient as sitting at the desk, because we can adjust the speed signs and all of the features that are on that sign from a desktop computer, Wi-Fi, so that's kind of nice. But I am also looking at some other options that maybe are a little bit more fiscally advantageous to us.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope you'll keep us in the loop as you investigate and evaluate other technologies, but I think that's a really useful resource that has proven beneficial, and I'm sure there's data from other communities and other municipalities that would prove that, again, that when they're deployed, and when they're deployed strategically in key settings, that they really do make a difference. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Tahar.
Yes, so my question was about the cost of the signs, and the second half of my question was, would it be to our benefit to have more signs of the
Well, I think the more we have, the more we can certainly deploy in our areas. Each community does have roads like East Henry, and my previous job was Meadowbrook Road, East Lake, South Lake. So also sharing with staff members that this just isn't specific with Saline, that these are roads that we have to maintain. We have to have a presence on, we have to have enforcement on, helps them understand as well. But certainly more signs to deploy would be nice.
And is there an added staffing cost for having addition? staff overhead for having one sign versus 6, for example?
No, generally our Sergeant Andy Hartwig, who works midnights, took the lead on this. This was given to him as his project. So he will do these things at midnight. So he brings the batteries in. They have 2 batteries. As long as we're not, putting the threshold for a lot of the flashing and the lights to go off, the strobe too low where it's going all the time, the batteries are lasting a good 2 weeks, and we have 2 of them. So he'll pull one out and charge it while the other one's still running the sign. So there's very minimal, now that we have all the stop signs off, and I do thank the DPW for getting all those up, it gives us more opportunity to deploy them, along the roadway. But it's really, it's a very simple, deployment of that sign. Some communities bring them in every day, some leave them out like we are. I feel very comfortable in that. There's a locking mechanism on it, so short of someone running over the sign, the pole itself, which I hope doesn't happen, but yeah, they've been a great resource for us.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Councilwoman Dillon.
Thank you. Yeah, I would definitely be in favor of having more signs if you're considering keeping one there, because I think there are quite a few areas in the city. I think some of my questions are going to be for Mr. Fordyce. He's like, oh no.
Apparently I'm getting some feedback on your microphone too.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault.
Mr. Fordyce, the signage, do you feel as though it's excessive? All the speed signs that we have now, not the electronic ones, but the speed limit signs.
The speed limit signs are more than anywhere else in the city. But I think, kind of given the character of the road, some additional signage is warranted there. There is, in the motor vehicle code, drivers are supposed to know that on certain kinds of streets, the speed limit is 25, and on other kinds of streets, it's 45, and on other ones, it's 55. But it's not really that practical. And the nature of Henry Street sort of changes as you go along, the visible nature of it, so having some extra speed limit signs there, I think, makes sense because it is.
So it doesn't look like a sign farm?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
I mean,
Is the plan
it's
to
basically
keep
every
them
block.
there forever?
Those are
Or
permanent.
is it just sort of, they're permanent?
Those are
Okay.
permanent installations, yeah.
Going back and moving off of signs, the Ann Arbor Henry Street intersection, has there been any study as to line of sight?
That is part of this analysis.
That is part of
yeah,
it,
yeah.
because it's becoming a bigger issue on both sides going east and west if you're on Henry Street.
Right.
I've seen a lot of near misses lately. I mean, people still struggle with navigating that intersection.
Right. So that line of sight is one of the primary focuses of that study. And then how we can improve it, and then also the pedestrian comfort level there. So the survey work, was looking at dimensions and, if you're sitting at this point in your car, how far can you see this way? If you're sitting at this point, how far can you see that way? So that is one of the key components of that study.
And has any kind of overhead light at that intersection off the table? Like even if it was just a flashing yellow one way, flashing red the other?
I know, so we.
Because people still don't seem to quite grasp it.
Yeah. I can't quite recall if we analyzed that possibility. I know we looked at the four-way stop
Right.
and whether that was warranted, but I don't remember if we then extended that to the flashing yellow, flashing red option. So I'll follow up on that.
Anything further, Ms. Dillon?
Actually, I have a question, but it goes sort of off of Henry Street, so I'm just going to put it out there since you're both standing there right now. People traveling from Ann Arbor Street making a left going westbound onto Michigan Avenue, it's becoming a huge problem with people turning on a red light. I have a green arrow to go from Michigan Avenue onto North Ann Arbor. and 2, 3 cars are cutting in front of me because they're already out in the intersection. I think we are going to have to address that somehow, and either it's going to have to be a no left turn, or we're going to have to really explore putting a left-hand signal there, because it's just a disaster waiting to happen. There is never an opportunity for those people to make a left-hand turn.
Yeah, I've certainly experienced that personally, trying to make that left onto Michigan. And, I mean, I have my ideas, but, you know, how to get folks to, I don't know, obey the signals is, I think, one of the challenges. There may be some timing changes that can be made. I know MDOT, I believe, was pretty resistant to dedicated left there because that takes more time in the cycle from Michigan Avenue. So at the time we did the 2016 reconstruct there, that was analyzed.
Right.
And I believe it was MDOT who essentially said no to that at that point, but always worth looking at again.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Seal?
Just a couple comments. I travel that road a lot these days because, as you may know, I live on the south side of town and we're building over there off of Monroe Street. So I frequently go up there to see the progress on the building that we've paid money down on. And so I travel down West Henry Street, and many times I travel along East Henry if I'm coming from another direction for the same purpose. So I not only travel the street, and I appreciate those flashing signs, because even though I do try to always obey the speed limit, figuring it would be bad form to have a former police officer stop by one of his former underlings to be reminded that I should obey the law. You get distracted, you get preoccupied, you get thinking about where you're going, what you're doing. 6 other things that flashing signal does bring you back to ground many times. And I now am in the habit of traveling probably 22 or 23 miles an hour through there instead of 25 or 26 or 27. So that they do help. I also frequently travel through Maybe, Michigan, and they have a 25-mile-an-hour speed zone right on their main drag. And they have those same signs, and that there is also very effective. So those signs work. They do help people, brings them back to right now and what they're doing. I also travel through that intersection there at Saline, Ann Arbor, and Monroe, and the vehicle I'm in sits up a little higher, so maybe I don't have the same trouble as others with sight lines, but generally speaking, I don't have trouble there. If you take your time, you ease out. If you're at a stop sign, I think it's a safe intersection, at least for vehicular traffic. Pedestrian traffic, I can understand why people would feel a little more at risk, because the drivers of vehicles many times are busy watching traffic and not watching for pedestrians. So, but I will say to my council colleagues that if you put another stop opportunity there where there wasn't one before, you increase the opportunity for accidents as well, because rear-end collisions at those stop signs are always a hazard. So good luck. Thank you for bringing us all the information, and good work with those flashing signs. They work well.
Thank you, Mr. Seal. Mr. Gearbo, one more thing?
Just one more thing. You know, we have the blinking yellow lights on like Monroe Street and Ann Arbor. Can those be hardwired with electric signs instead of solar ones? Because they're already electrical, and would those be less expensive? You know, we have the blinking yellow lights, and it's like, those have been there for 20 years now, but I didn't know if you could add a speed sign to it, which would actually give a little more oomph on those locations.
My impression is that most of those speed indicator signs are battery operated, but certainly we can take a look and see if there's
Just,
a
I didn't
less
know if that would
expensive
be an
option.
easier, cheaper way to do it, instead of having to go with the solar and the lithium and all that stuff.
That would then be fixed to that location, of course. So
Right.
we'd lose-
But it would add an enhancement, because those were put up on the really, when those were put up, those were the really
Those are the bad spots. where
bad
people-
spots
yeah.
in town.
Yep.
All right, gentlemen, well, you have some work to do, and of course, you'll report back to us when you have something tangible to share, but we appreciate your continued work on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there's nothing further to be brought up under the discussion portion of the agenda, we move now to the second public comment period under the Open Meetings Act. Any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments?
Matt Rockwell, I am very, very disappointed in making that gay lesbian thing that you guys had on the agenda tonight something. It's wrong. It's very wrong. If that's the way this city is going, I'm moving. I'm moving out. I'm moving to a different town that does not believe in that stuff. I'll move down to Temperance. You guys suck at what we put you guys in to work for us. I hope the Ninth District Court knocks this down off your blanks, because I voted you guys in. I can write you out, and I will write you guys out if you guys keep it like this. If you guys put it into act, I will write each and every one of you guys off when it comes time to vote. I'm even talking to the mayor right now, and each and one of you guys. If you keep it up, I'm done.
Mary Hess, since we're talking about traffic, I'd like to put a bid in for Old Creek. Old Creek is a cul-de-sac of where they think it's a boulevard. There is not one sign that says 25 miles per hour. And people are avoiding, of course, South Ann Arbor Street because in front of your house and up, it's bad. So they're going down Old Creek. And I'm asking that we could possibly put a 25 mile an hour because they really go down that sucker. Thank you.
Additional citizen comments? Thank you, Mrs. Hess. We will certainly evaluate Old Creek, and as it relates to comments you made earlier this evening about the amount of debt that the city has, I'd be happy to get with you sometime later this week and provide you that information. If there's nothing further to be brought before City Council this evening, please note our upcoming meetings on June 18th and July 9th, excuse me. There are no absences, so the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn at 8:57 p.m.
So moved.
Moved by Gearbaugh. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by McClellan. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it.